'Tis the end of an era. The third season of Tower of God is over. Before we even realized it, the third season of Tower of God is done, and as of the moment I am recording and uploading this, we're waiting for season 4. We're waiting for the promised spin-off of Tower of God. And while we're waiting, I thought it'd be prudent and pretty cool to talk about my favorite arcs of Tower of God Season 3, specifically ranking them. It's kind of just an excuse to do a review of Season 3. There are 5 major arcs in Season 3, with a ton, more than any other, a ton of mini arcs scattered all throughout. So I thought it'd be pretty fun to rank them, see which ones are my favorite. I'm comparing them to the previous arcs of Tower of God. So comparing them to Season 1 and 2. If I were to rank them, here's what I would rank them, right? So if I'm putting something in S, A, B, C, whatever, it's in comparison to the rest of Tower of God, not in comparison to solely Season 3. If you want to just hear my thoughts on specific arcs, you can use the timestamps, blah, blah, blah. We're going to tackle these in order of appearance. So the first arc is The Cage. The Cage is a pretty interesting arc. The Cage is how we started Season 3. We start with seeing Louis and Bomb. We get a little bit before then, but essentially it starts with Bomb finding Louis for the purposes of finding Dang Dang, for the purposes of recruiting Yama, for the purposes of rescuing Jin Sung. It was kind of an elaborate plan, an elaborate scheme, but this is what kicks off Season 3. And the crazy thing is, The Cage gets a lot of hate. Maybe hate is a strong word. It is one of the most, if not the most criticized arc of Tower of God, at least in terms of what I've seen. The opinions may differ to an extent, but from what I've seen, there's been a fair amount of criticism for The Cage as an arc. And what I think is interesting is there's a lot about The Cage that people forget about. I'm not saying The Cage is beyond criticism, but I'm just saying there's a lot of cool moments that happen in The Cage. First of all, the introduction of some of the coolest characters in the series take place in this arc. The obvious one being Yama. Baylord Yama is such a mainstay character in Tower of God, but even characters like Kel Halam and Baylord Doom, who play a kind of side character role going forward in Season 3. And it's crazy how these two Baylord brothers, man, they have such a bond, such a cool dynamic and relationship, and I just love seeing these two bros being bros. We're in the correct timeline. Even some of the more minor characters like Jordan. Jordan is like an all-timer for me. Jordan is a character that came out of nowhere and stole the hearts of the community, and he has some great moments. I feel like The Cage does a good job utilizing the new characters that it introduces for the most part. I'm gonna get to that. But there's, Jordan has his badass moments. You've got Coon and the Flamefish. I know there's some, you can break that down some more, but it's undeniable that Coon plays a pretty significant role in this arc. Rack gets the Ancient Spear even. We get to see Rack utilizing his ancient powers. It's very, very interesting. And if I was to bring in my more critical eye with this arc, it would be that there's a lot of characters that are introduced, especially the antagonists, right? At first, it seems like Yama might be the antagonist, but then we kind of keep going a little bit more, and it turns out that Doom is hinted at being this, intimidating, crazy antagonist. Doom ends up just, being the older brother who tags along, and then Kel Halam is the antagonist now. And then Evan Kel shows up, and then it's like, wait a minute, but there's this Yasracha character that's teased. It feels like the arc kind of keeps going different places, and so there are certainly aspects that feel a bit loose. I would say that Chang was severely underutilized this arc, all memes aside. He is alive, but all memes aside, if Chang did really die there, and even if he's still alive, it feels like a waste of the potential and the buildup of his character over the years. Doom as a character as well feels somewhat underutilized. Like, he has his moment with Bomb, and he has his moments with Yama, but as a character, I feel as though Doom could have perhaps served a more strong purpose as far as the arc goes. Like, just generally speaking, this ties into the following arc, but we have all this stuff happening, and a lot of the major conflicts regarding the canines and regarding which brother gets to rule, once new antagonists are introduced, that stuff just kind of gets pushed aside, and it never gets elaborated on pretty much throughout the rest of Season 3. Like, this plot point about who should rule the canines, it just ends up being Yama. And, Doom is supposed to be this, kind of arch enemy of Yama. And I do love their brotherly dynamic. It just feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere a little bit for me. Hot take, though, the Dang Dang stuff, I actually like. I think Gado is a great antagonist because I hate him a lot. I think SIU did a great job telling this story of Gado and Dang Dang. I thought that stuff was good. I thought Dang Dang's death was good. It was unexpected. There's this whole moment of like, ooh, a canine can live without their heart for 5 minutes. And it was like, okay, that's how Deng Deng's gonna survive. No, Deng Deng just dies. And Bomb has to reckon with the old idea of you can't save everybody, but more that Bomb made a promise that he couldn't keep. But I think that's a really interesting moment. It triggers a lot of great character development for Bomb. Thinking about it more, we have Ghost versus Bomb during this arc, and we have the return of Baragov. There's so much cool stuff that does take place in the cage. I do think it has a lot of kind of weak moments though. So with all that in mind, I would put the cage in B tier. I'd put the cage in B tier. I think if I had to pick a kind of like weakest arc in the story of Tower of God, it would probably be the cage. But even the weakest arc in Tower of God is still, in my opinion, an entertaining, fun, and overall great addition to the story. Then we get to the Wall of Peaceful Coexistence, and this is a pretty short arc, relatively. There's not a ton that happens. It's fairly short. I think it's only like 20 chapters. The whole point of the arc is to make sure that the heroes in the walls don't get reawoken, and if they do, make sure they're on our side. It's kind of this interesting game of telling these old stories about the Hidden Grove, while also getting to see what happened to them now, and getting to see this dynamic between characters like Doan and Calavan, or even before then, like Kane and Calavan, which are really interesting. We get to see more of like random interactions between some of the characters like Hot and White. We get to see Bomb, Kun, and Rack acting as a team, getting to work together. Bomb flexing more of his Thrissa powers, which is always really cool. I like it. I think the walls are good. I think Doan and Cha are interesting characters. I think Cha is like a mainstay fan favorite, and the fact that he's introduced here alongside the pretty interesting backstory about the Hidden Grove and Kel Halam and Jihad and even there's a lot of really cool stuff that happens here. We get Calavan versus White, which is an all-timer as far as especially season 3 goes. I think it's so badass. So there's a lot of good stuff here. I think overall it's a pretty short arc, and that's not necessarily to detract from it. Like, just because it's short, it doesn't mean it's like worse inherently, but I do think there's not enough like great moments that I would put it too high on the list. Like, it's kind of just like a nice, good arc. It does its job. It introduces some characters, even though I have qualms about how these characters are handled in the future. As far as just this arc goes, it does a great job of setting up the next arc. But by itself, I'd give the Wall of Peaceful Coexistence a nice B ranking. It's got some good fights, it's got some good character moments, and I think it's a good arc, you know? I promise I'm not giving them all B tier, but this is just generally how I feel. I consider Cage and the Wall of Peaceful Coexistence to be around the same level, at least as far as I go. I think the Cage had more lows, but higher highs, if that makes sense. Whew. Okay, so now we get to the Nest. The Nest is interesting. The Nest is considered by some to be like a terrible arc, you know, so much wasted potential. Maybe it has some good moments, but overall it feels lacking in a lot of ways, and it was disappointing. And then to some people, it's like peak Tower of God. It's like the best thing they've ever read, and they love it more than any other arc in the series. So where does Dr. Bonehead land in this, between these 2 points? I think the Nest it's pretty damn peak. I think the Nest is pretty damn peak. It's so good. It utilizes side characters super well. And you guys know I love side characters. I think if an arc can utilize the side characters well, then it automatically gets some points for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think there are things that could have been handled better. I've always said that Bomb versus White could have been handled better. I think Arya as a character could have been handled better. I think some of the fights, like Calavan and Lyborek, the endings could have been handled better. There's a lot of like interruptions that the fights kind of get cut off and extended further. Don't get me wrong, I think all of that stuff is true, but even with that in mind, characters like Han Sung-yu and Hots and Cha and Jin Sung, and yes, even White, getting to have all of this time to shine, I love it. This arc is about Ban rescuing Jin Sung, but when I think of the Nest, I think of Yasracha, I think of Traumarai, I think of Yama, and I think of Wang Wang and Nen Nen. Still to this day, the best flashback in all of Tower of God, in my opinion. Such a great story. This isn't even including like Haracha's backstory and including like the Kendrick DL stuff, setting up Yasracha as a character to make the Nen Nen and Wang Wang flashbacks pay off so much. It's so good. Oh, dude, and Mule Love showing up and getting to kick ass? Come on. I think the Nest is one of the best arcs in all of Tower of God. When I think of like peak season 3, it's almost exclusively Nest stuff. I think some of the weaker stuff would probably be the Bomb storyline. I think the Bomb and Leviathan stuff isn't my favorite. I think that stuff is like, when we cut to Bomb, it's maybe a little bit more on the boring side. I think the peak stuff of the Nest all has to do with like pretty much everybody else. Now, pre-hiatus Nest, so pre-Gakcha Doseng, right? And Gakcha Doseng, by the way, fun game. Still feel like Elaine was one side character that was especially done dirty, but like aside from that, very fun game. I think lots of utilized potential there. But like pre-hiatus Nest, you've got like characters like Charlie showing up. You've got like Bomb versus Calivan. You've got Yama and like the canines having to fight, and I think it's really good. I think like we get these cool scenes of like Kun utilizing the souls to power White, and in my head, when I think of and imagine that time, very nostalgic. You know, we had this long hiatus where the community like stayed together, and like when we returned, it was so hype. So I do admit that I may have some bias towards some aspect of the Nest as an arc, but I still gotta say it is, in my opinion, one of the best, and I don't think that's gonna change.
So with all that said, the Nest goes into the S tier.
Following the Nest, we get to another little hiatus, and then it is the Marriage Tournament, or sometimes colloquially called the Hotel Arc. Now, I once on stream was talking about the Hotel Arc, and I mentioned it being one of the weaker arcs of, I can't remember, Tower of God or Season 3, and the chat kind of was like, wait, really? And they kind of pushed back, and I thought about it some more, and I realized the hotel arc is actually kind of good. Like, for some reason in my head, I saw it as a kind of in-between Wall of Peaceful Coexistence style, like, you know, it takes place in between these two major arcs. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized, I think the Marriage Tournament is kind of like a better example of the Wall of Peaceful Coexistence. It's kind of like a really nice, it's still short on the short side, but it utilizes its characters extremely well. And the fights are very interesting. It's not just like power beams shooting at each other. They're like well choreographed. It's intense. A lot of stakes. Characters are dying left and right. I know SIU and Tower of God can get that like, ooh, more characters should die kind of, you know, response, and that's fair to a degree. But there's a lot of characters that you think like, oh, SIU likes to introduce characters that are gonna serve some role. No, like he introduces 10 characters and 9 of them are dead within like 2 seconds. It's kind of wild, and it makes the arc feel like, again, scary, and there's a lot of stakes. It's intense, you know, and characters like Hemus Lime and, oh god, what was the name? Chaop, right? Characters like Hemus Lime and Chaop and Dravi. It's very, very cool. Like, these are kind of like only in this arc characters, and yet they're memorable. We get more of Lilial, which I think is really important too, and it's all really great. And Dorsey has a lot of screen time, and I love Dorsey in this arc, and like Yuri showing up at the end. Freaking Jam Jam. If I just name drop Jam Jam and walk away, yeah, this is automatically a top tier arc. And I think the climax is super good too. Bomb freeing the creatures from Traumarized Aquarium, and essentially saying, I want to do this for the family leaders. It sets up a lot of what makes season 3 and going forward so important for Bomb as a character and the family heads as characters. It's really, really solid stuff. Obviously, the Serpent Master storyline I think is really good too, like surprisingly good. I wasn't really sure where it was gonna go at first, but like, it's very interesting. It sets up the princesses, the twin princesses, and Laura as very interesting characters, not to mention the Serpent Master being one of the best dads in the series. Hello? Like, out of nowhere. Damn. I know the bar isn't that high, but geez. I got through all of that without even mentioning Ren. Bomb versus Ren is such a good fight. Like, it's, again, an example of not just shooting beams at each other until one of them is stronger and that's it. No, like, there's actually interesting stuff happening here. There's choreography. Ren pulls out a knife at some point. It's like, dude, I don't know. The dynamic of teacher and student from season 1, I think that's all so good. Overall, I would give Marriage Tournament an A. I think it's so good. It basically does everything as well as it needs to. I think it serves its purpose extremely well. I think Marriage Tournament, solid arc. Really, really solid arc. Now, believe it or not, that brings us to the final arc of Tower of God. Again, there's like so many mini arcs, so it's kind of hard to, you know, group them together. Like there's this in-between segment of Yama and Yasracha going and trying to find the book and all that stuff. I'm kind of tying all that stuff into the Sprout as the final arc of Tower of God. It's always hard to group these up. I think the Sprout is quite good. I think it's a great finale to season 3. Honestly, in a way, if season 3 would have continued on after the Sprout, I almost feel like it would have taken away from what the Sprout itself is. And I say that because I think it ties together everything. I think it ties together all of the previous plot threads regarding Traumerei. So like essentially everything in season 3. Think about it, from the cage, introducing Yama, which introduces us eventually to Yesracha, which eventually introduces us to Traumerei, and then it just goes and goes and goes. And I think the Sprout does a great job of tying it all together. Week by week, I will say, there were some flaws that were realized by a decent chunk of the community, especially regarding the chess piece game. Like, slay the chess pieces, I love the concept. I think some of these fights, like Bomb versus Dumas, so good, it's so great, but just goes on like a long time. And if you read it week by week especially, it's kind of hard to, I don't know, it feels especially dragged out in some cases of like Bomb being basically dead and then doing something crazy, then basically dead, doing something crazy. Like, there's a lot of that stuff, and maybe if some of that was tighter, maybe again, reading it more, like binging it instead of week by week, I do think there are some improvements that could have been made there, but I don't see it as harshly as some people might. I think there's a lot, like even just looking at Bomb versus Dumas, finally using Leviathan in a way that I feel like makes Leviathan cool, makes Leviathan feel like earned, like maybe not earned, but utilizing Leviathan's powers in a way that isn't just like, I'm stronger. It's like, no, like we actually, Bomb is able to like turn these bones, turn this like, this Leviathan strength into different weapons and utilize these cool new abilities like hand to hand. Like, it feels like, you know, Sword and Shield from Blue and Red Thrissa. Now Leviathan is like turning into this like bow / hand to hand combat ability. It feels like Leviathan actually served a unique purpose rather than just be like another power that Bomb added to his repertoire. Black March coming back during that fight was also really cool. I think Bomb versus Dumas was really solid, despite that. So I want to make that clear. And the fight wasn't even Bomb winning. Like, it was more Bomb proving himself to Dumas, and then Dumas letting him go. Dumas made it clear, I'm stronger than you. You know, outside the body, I'm even stronger than you. And Bomb was like, damn, I love that. Like, Bomb doesn't have to win. He just has to prove that he has potential, you know? And I think that was a great choice by SIU. If Bomb had beaten Dumas there, is the story almost over? Because now Bomb just has to get to family head level, and that's kind of crazy. Rack's moment was cool, even if perhaps a bit sudden and kind of in and out, you know? Like, I get, again, give Rack something to do before the end of season 3. Like, there's some merit there, but you know, you can break some of Kun and Rack down. I think Kun and Rack were characters that maybe were on the weaker end in season 3. But outside of like Kun and Rack, who I think were on the weaker end in season 3 as a whole, and hopefully in season 4 getting more of that kind of character development, I think Sprout was fantastic. I think it had some of the greatest flashbacks regarding like the family heads, regarding Enkidu. Dude, just the Enkidu story alone, which was told entirely within the Sprout in various portions. What a masterclass in storytelling. The fact that that Enkidu and I guess SIU, like through Enkidu and Traumerei, were able to initially make us think that Enkidu killed a muse. Then the plot twist is that Traumerei controlled Enkidu to kill a muse, and then there's a later plot twist that Enkidu actually was the reason that that whole thing even happened in the first place by manipulating a muse. But at the same time, Enkidu should have told a muse because this necromancy stuff that Traumerei is doing is kind of messed up. There's so many factors that go into it, and it makes the situation so like gritty. Because it's not like, ooh, Traumerei is just a bad guy. Is he a bad guy? For sure. But it's more than that. It's like, it's complicated, right? And I love that. I think it's a great way to keep us involved and interested, make us realize, wait, there's more happening here. This isn't just a simple situation. Just the Enkidu story. And that's not even talking about like Enkidu as a character and Traumerei as a character. We should probably talk about Traumerei. Perfect way to conclude season 3. Traumerei's death was so well executed for so many reasons, and it deserves its own video. But the tragedy, the empathy that you can feel for who is, as Gustang rightfully put it, you know, the most evil man in the tower is a masterclass in writing. Once again, hey, you could say I'm gassing up SIU too much. I'm just speaking my truth. Man, again, I gotta make a whole video on this. Everything that goes into Gustang as a character, Amuse as a character, and the fact that this entire time his memories were being like suppressed because of the contract that family heads have, it completely reshapes everything. Like, it recontextualizes all the previous arcs that included Traumarai, we understood he was feeding memories to Leviathan, but there's so much more than that. He was essentially forcing himself to become a zombie, and at the very end, when it all hit him out of nowhere, it's just heartbreaking. It to me, you know, I went into this being like, ooh, I hate Traumarai, even though I liked him as a character, and by the end, I was shocked that SIU could do that to me, could like take my heart and twist it like that. Not to mention my boy Gustang, bro. Gustang, so sick this arc. You can say he had help from V's item that he gave him. You could say he had help from Blossom's flames. I don't care. Gustang freaking won. Gustang is like the smartest man in the tower, maybe outside of like Mixeth or something. And the fact that he was able to essentially clutch this victory against Traumarai, partially due to the influence of like Bellerir and Revolution and these betrayals that are happening. So freaking good. I'm so proud of my boy. And he's definitely alive. For sure, he's alive, guys. What do you look at me like that for? I don't know, dude. There's like too much to talk about. There's so much to talk. Hua-Ryun, the fact that V is inside a bomb, and Hua-Ryun really kind of revealing that she knew the whole time, and that he's gonna hate her for this someday, and then we get this like possession of bomb, and that's what ends up leading to the conclusion of everything. Man, there's like too much to talk about, like Revolution and Bellerir and Enkidu and Tiara and like you know all the deaths that happen, like some of them for better, some of them for worse. I think Tiara's death was handled great. Like I think she served her purpose very nicely, actually. But then characters like Doan, you know, if she really did die, feels like wasted potential since we had an entire arc all about her character and she didn't really do that much since. You know, there's like pros and cons there, but like as a whole, man, I think the Sprout, not to mention the freaking finale and everything that happened there. I think the Sprout is the perfect example of some high highs and some lows, but again, not as many that I can tell as people are pointing out. I think week by week, I was in, and the only weak parts had to do with the chess game, somewhere in the middle, and even then, I would give the Sprout as a whole, the conclusion of Season 3, an A-tier ranking. I think it is a great arc. Is it one of like the greatest in the entire series? I wouldn't go that far, because I do think there's enough to hold it back. But I think it deserves a spot among the great, or even like really great arcs of Tower of God, especially factoring in the absolute peak that is Traumarai's story. The Traumarai as a character, I think he's gonna go down as one of the greats. And I think a lot of that, if not most of that, has to do with the Sprout. So there you go, Season 3. Those are my rankings as far as where I would put them, kind of compared to the rest of Tower of God. I think Season 3 was great. I think, sure, is it like not as good as Season 2? Like, I guess, but I kind of dislike the constant need to compare it to, you know, the previous seasons. I think Season 3 had a goal in mind, and SIU said as much at the very end, and I think SIU absolutely accomplished that goal, despite what some readers may think. As a reader, I think he did. And it makes me excited to see what changes are made for Season 4's story. Because I think the Season 3 storyline was Yasracha and Traumarai. And I think that story was told so well. And so I would give Season 3 as a whole like an 8.5. I think, sure, does it have some of the lowest points in the series? Yeah, I guess so. But that's Tower of God we're talking about. To say that Tower of God's lowest points are like a 7, you know, maybe, like for me, I'm not going to be that critical about it. And I do think Season 3 has some pretty peak moments. So I gotta give it its dues. I think Season 3 was great. But where would you put these arcs? What do you think about these arcs? I'm sure you disagree with a lot of my opinions, and that's great. I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. What did you think? What are you excited about for Season 4? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.